Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Please like and subscribe. This is the official Conan the Barbarian podcast, and I am Sean Curley. Today, we have a big treat for you. If you are a fan of the Heroic Signatures Conan the Barbarian comic book series, the name Jim Zub will sound familiar. He is the mastermind behind our Conan comics and has also contributed to our new Savage Sword series. And there is a big event in the works, people, the Blackstone crossover. You will have seen a taste of that on Free Comic Book Day. So we're gonna dive deep into all of it. We're gonna pick the brain of the genius that is Jim Zub. Consider this Zub Hub Central for the next hour. Enjoy. Jim, welcome to the show, man. I am so honored. This is really cool. I'm a huge fan of the new Conan comics that you're writing. Let's just get right into it. How did you get your start in comics, and what was your childhood like?
So as a reader, I've been a comic book collector since I was a little kid. Obviously, whatever, you read comics in the newspaper and all that kind of stuff, but I started collecting in and around, I must have been eight years old probably. The G.I. Joe cartoon was out, and then Marvel had their own G.I. Joe comic that I had stumbled across. And the stories were so much more visceral and cool and, badass. And Larry Hama and the crew that he had on there, they were just doing such a phenomenal job with that comic. And it brought in tons of new readers. But there were also, ads for other characters. And I had seen the Spider-Man cartoon and things growing up. And I really hunkered down on Amazing Spider-Man. And through that, kind of the Marvel universe really opened up to me. My older brother, he is my kind of proto-nerd. He was into comics and sci-fi and fantasy novels. And eventually, he and I played tons of Dungeons & Dragons together. And he would end up buying most of the Lancer paperbacks for Conan the Barbarian, from used bookstores and stuff like that. He started reading the novels. We started reading the comics. My cousins had, my older cousins had copies of Savage Sword of Conan kicking around. And then it just started to just steep into all the things we loved about sword and sorcery, that those two things kind of came hand in hand. The kind of, if you think of Tolkien as like high fantasy, then Conan was like low fantasy. It was dark and it was mysterious and it was dangerous. And you would never be the great hero of destiny, with the magic item that's going to save the day. You were just struggling to survive in a world that was cruel and strange, and the movements of gods and monsters were well beyond you. And that was what, real sword and sorcery feels like to me. And it's very much at the heart of the pulps and the works of, obviously Robert E. Howard and the many people that he inspired. And so that was sort of my starting point. Was all of it ties together. As much as I just want to talk about the comics, it kind of interweaves together. Like, to me, growing up, Dungeons & Dragons and pulp novels and comics are just kind of intermixed all over the place. And they all feed into this kind of primordial essence of what I love about sword and sorcery.
Now, you mentioned Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of Conan fans and creators that I've spoken to had an early love for role-playing board games. How do you feel that games like Dungeons & Dragons or Mutant Chronicles have contributed to your success as a storyteller?
It totally changed my life. I actually did like a TEDx talk about this, that I wouldn't be a creator and a creative person without Dungeons & Dragons. That it made me go from wanting to just passively read or watch and be entertained to wanting to have a proactive interaction around storytelling, that I wanted to make things with people, that I wanted the feedback of having done something, made a decision, and everyone at the table responds, and we make a roll, and none of us quite know where this thing's going to go, but we have to kind of do it together. That's what, D&D sort of encompasses to me, is that idea of interactivity and engagement with the people, at the table that I'm playing with, whether it's old friends that we've built this amazing kind of rambling, ongoing story together, or meeting new people and kind of breaking the ice with them and figuring out what kinds of things we like and spontaneously what sort of things we want to do. That's what a great, tabletop role-playing game does, is it breaks down social barriers between people and gives us this common ground to kind of invent ourselves and have fun and be spontaneous and bold in ways that we just don't we don't get to do very often in our day-to-day lives, and that creative fire that it lit in me to want to tell stories and want to engage and entertain people is just like, it's been continuous since then, whether that is through, writing prose or writing comics or meeting people at conventions or running my own tabletop games for friends. The through line there is wanting that engagement and wanting to build things that I'm proud of.
You mentioned fan engagement several times. I think that that's something you excel at. You're really good at communicating with fans. Can you talk about your relationship with them?
Yeah, you got to come at it. Any of the stuff we do is built off of communication, empathy, and entertainment. And I don't mean that in like a cold hard branding kind of way, but just remembering why you got into this stuff in the first place. And that kind of energy and joy that you have for what we do, that I get to be a part of that and bring, ideally, something to people that they're going to enjoy. It's something like the Conan comic. Every single month, they get this little cool burst of energy and excitement, that they're picking up from the comic book shop or they're downloading onto their tablet or whatever. That's especially with such a long-lived character with such phenomenal legacy. You don't take that stuff for granted. And I always feel so like humbled by the fact that this property in this world is generational, that people, my grandfather, could read the original pulp stories, or my dad or my uncle and me. And then, a whole new generation of readers is coming on board all that time. When you are working with a character that is an icon, and that's what Conan is, there are a handful of these characters that are templates that everyone knows. That if you walk out on the street to a random group of people, not at a Comic-Con, like anywhere in North America for sure, but all over the world, and you say the word barbarian, like Conan is the default setting. That is the icon. It's the template. It's what everyone expects. And if it isn't, then it's because you're purposefully avoiding that character. You're making distinct creative choices to make a barbarian that is not Conan. And if you're doing that, that's because Conan exists. You know what I mean? That's how powerful it is. That if you have a superhero, then they're built off of a mold of a Superman or a Batman or, in some cases, a Spider-Man. That there's only one barbarian, and there's only that solitary warrior figure feeds into, samurai stories, and it feeds into the kind of mythological knights of old and all those kinds of things, but in this very distinct way. There were hundreds of pulp writers through the 1930s, but, less than 5 probably stick in people's minds in the here and now. And Robert E. Howard is one of them because of that legacy of that character. And so, believe it or not, I am talking about the cons, because when I get to go to these conventions, you are representing that for people in the here and now. You're representing their excitement for that character, for that genre, that shared, experience of our love for this thing. And so when I'm at that table and we're chatting about this stuff, whether it's someone who has been reading and loves it and wants to meet me and get a book signed, or someone who is just wandering the show and exploring for the first time, you've got a chance to make a real connection with them. And in whatever time you've got, if it's a 30-second little interaction and sign a cover, that's great. Or if it's like, we're going to have a 15-minute deep dive and get into the heart of this thing. Either way, I want to make the best impression possible in terms of why we're here to do it. And if I can't do that at a show, I'd rather not be there. You know what I mean? Like you don't get a lot of those opportunities to have that kind of interaction with the people who are directly supporting your work, and hopefully will do so, for the foreseeable future. And so I really do look at it as, and it's not corny at all. It's like an honor. It's an honor to hang out with people. It's an honor to travel to all these different places and talk about this stuff, to have people engaged and interested in what I think this character can be and what we're putting on the page. And so it's all part of the deal, and I try and treat social media for the most part the same way. And it can be really easy to go down pathways of negativity, and we all get pulled into that stuff at times. But for the most part, I try and keep a pretty positive air on it and look towards, if someone doesn't like something that we're doing, okay, cool. Let us know. Give us the feedback. Stiff upper lip and we can do better next time, or keep reading and I think we'll surprise you. Because at heart of it, all of us working on this series are deep fans. Richard Starkings, the letterer on Conan the Barbarian, he has lettered dozens and dozens of Conan series at different publishers over the years. And he sought us out to letter this series because he believed in the team we were putting together. That he begged to want to be on the team. And he's an award-winning legend in this industry, and he wanted to be on board, right? The Rob Delatorre's got this, pulp kind of pouring out of his pores on every single page, or Doug Braithwaite's drawn some of the best pages of his career. And I've got the joy of seeing that come into my inbox every few days. Like, that is a really cool, special thing. So it's pretty easy for me to kind of channel that energy when I meet people and shake their hand and kind of go, check this out. We got something really cool going on.
I'm curious, you mentioned fan reactions. I'd say that overwhelmingly, most of it has been positive. But how do you handle negative reactions?
I think sometimes fans get the idea like we think our stuff is sacrosanct. Like not every project is going to go the way you want it to go. And so sometimes you send one out there and you're like, man, we ran out of time, or it wasn't quite the right alchemical fix between the artist and the writer, or the colors didn't work, or something got printed wrong, or whatever. You're aware usually that there's a problem there. And you're like, okay, sometimes it's a learning experience. But other times it's like you have a different approach on the material than a certain portion of the fan base, or you are coming at it from a different angle, or there are many masters that you have to serve in terms of working on these properties that are owned and controlled by other people. And so you kind of have to, you got to be prepared to sometimes take your licks and realize that no one's perfect. No one's going to do it right every single time. I'm obviously overjoyed at the overwhelmingly positive response that we've got for Conan right now. And I know I'm trying to bottle that feeling and hold on to it as much as possible, because, we can't hit a home run every single month. I'm pretty sure we've got a killer consistency right now, but you never know down the road. And so I've just got to kind of keep my eye focused on the prize. Like, we know what we're trying to do. We're trying to deliver the damn best entertainment we can and earn your cover price, every single time. But on the other hand, you kind of have to shake off any of those little misses, or just sort of go like, all right, that's something we've learned, add that to the reference pool, and away you go. And over the years, I've had the joy to work on so many different properties, stuff I grew up on, superheroes and Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of funky stuff. And then newer stuff too, Rick and Morty and Samurai Jack and things like that. And the fans are passionate about this stuff because they love it. The worst thing for me would be no response whatsoever. If nobody cares and no one responds, then you're dead in the water. You know what I mean? Not that I want people to be angry. I'm not going out of my way to like purposefully, kick the hornet's nest or something like that. But I'd rather hear something from people than hear nothing. So their excitement, their exuberance, their praise. I'm a writer, man. Sure, lay it on me. I'm always going to have a bit of a, we've all got moments of imposter syndrome. Hearing that you're doing a damn good job is never going to be a bad thing. But if you have an issue, if you have a problem, tell us. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what you're excited about. Tell us what you want to see more of. I can't promise you're always going to get it exactly the way you want, but I can tell you that we're listening and that we're excited to make the best damn, book we can. And that's really kind of where it's at for me. And one of the benefits of being at a con, every so often, someone will come over and they'll level criticism at you. Generally not in the same kind of, I think, explosive way you might get online, but that ability to interact with someone in person and just body language and tone, that you can sort through a thing and explain where you're coming from with somebody, I think is actually really cool. Doesn't happen too often, but when it does, I think people can be a bit surprised that they're expecting some sort of intense confrontation. And you're like, you know what? I appreciate the feedback. Or, hey, you may not realize this other aspect of the thing. Or keep reading and maybe your concern will be addressed in the plot. Whatever that might be. That's that's all part and parcel of the communication kind of thing, and realizing that it's an ongoing conversation, especially on something like a monthly series where it's not just a movie and it's a complete unit of entertainment and we can, dig through it and make decisions in terms of absolute quality. Sometimes you're like, yes, this chapter might be a little bit bumpy, but if you see it as part of the whole, it serves a very important purpose, or things like that.
Okay, well, I know this was a big influence on you, so I got to ask, what are your thoughts on the original Conan movie, and what would you like to see happen in the next TV show or film adaptation?
For me, obviously, the original Conan the Barbarian movie came out at a really formative time for me. I didn't see it in the theaters because it was R-rated and I was very young. But by the time it came onto home video, we rented it I was way younger than I should have been the first time I saw it. But it imprinted on me like the perfect Dungeons and Dragons adventure. That feeling of the caper and the mixed kind of group of misfit mercenaries doing whatever it was to steal the Eye of the Serpent and all that kind of stuff. And then the accompanying rising drama with the character. It's got the best damn soundtrack probably in all of fantasy moviedom, and such iconic visuals. And I know that the literary purists really are frustrated by the movie because it has cast such a long shadow on the literary property. But on the other hand, it elevated it to absolute pop culture status in a way that I don't think the novels alone or the comics alone could do. And it's all part of that bigger, broader kind of conversation around the Hyborian age. So for me, it's, now as someone who's much more marinated in the original short stories, the classic comics, and trying to build out that mythology in a way that honors the original pulp stories of Robert E. Howard, I could nitpick that thing to hell and back, and yet you could also learn a lot from it too. Not that I want to throw things out from the original Conan canon, but that the impact of really iconic locations and visuals and symbols and statements can make really powerful entertainment. And I think that that's what that movie does. There's a reason why certain, lines of dialogue, the riddle of steel, or, Conan, what is best in life, and all that kind of stuff has become absolutely iconic in pop culturedom, that you can say it and everyone knows what you're talking about, that everyone's got an Arnold impression, and they know the Atlantean sword, and they know those characters. And so to me, it's like, okay, look at the benefit of that in that iconic status and understand how it works as a unit of entertainment and channel some of that energy in a positive direction rather than sitting there. And if someone says, oh, do you like the movie? I could, put up my glasses. Well, it's not 100% accurate to the original book. And you're like, sure, but almost no adaptation is. And what it gets right is that real core energy of danger and consequences in the Hyborian age, the visceral kind of violence and the mystery and the darkness and possibility in a sword and sorcery adventure. And so if you look at those things as a success, then you learn from it and you try and put the best of that into something like the comics, where I would never go against what's in the original Robert E. Howard stories, but I can also try and go, okay, you know what? I want to have a really amazing action set piece here. I want to have a really potent item that sticks in people's minds, or an iconic visual that really drives our story forward in and around the traditions of, the Howard pulp stories. And that's where it all kind of fits for me. And if someone comes to my table and they start quoting the movie stuff at me, rather than me being all bitter or frustrated or trying to one-up them, hey, this property, your excitement around it, why don't you check these comics out? I think you're going to get just as big a thrill out of, the artwork of Rob Delatore and Doug Braithwaite as you did, sitting in the theater when you were 10 years old or whatever. And so that's kind of where it is for me. And whatever film or television stuff comes next, I think can learn from it in that broader sense I would love to see something that hewed a lot closer to the short stories that used as many of those kind of iconic moments from my favorites, whether it's, Tower of the Elephant or Frost Giant's Daughter or God in the Bowl or Red Nails or whatever, but that you think very carefully about big, killer, bombastic set pieces and combat that feels like it's as intense as possible, and a soundtrack that has that soaring intensity that we can take from the original film. And if you marry those two things together, I feel like you've got a winner on your hands, no matter, what else kind of comes about.
1000% yes.
It is definitely one of those things that people ask you, and the hardcore Robert E. Howard fans are so quick to strike because they feel that film has diminished the literary quality of the stories. And I understand and empathize with that, as any fan, could. But on the other hand, it helped kind of permanently place that character in pop culture conversation in a way that even the iconic Frazetta covers and the Roy Thomas, John Buscema, and Barry Windsor Smith comics were not quite at that absolute global world beater status. Do you know what I mean? I have seen photos from collectors where they have turned their man cave into a Conan room. And I'm not talking one or two. I'm talking 30 or 40 people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars to outfit this room to look like a shrine to Conan the Barbarian. And the majority of that is the film, but the comics are in there and the statues and the toys and the sword props and all that stuff. But the movie is the biggest part of it. It had the most visceral effect on them as a now lifelong fan. And if you try and just deny that or hand wave that off, I think that's reductive and foolish.
Regardless of what anyone's opinion is, that movie is monumental to the legacy of Conan. It definitely catapulted him to a much wider audience.
It's kept the home fires burning in ways that one media alone would not be able to do. I think now you've got with the video games and the board game and tabletop RPG and toys, like it's an empire of possibilities, but a lot of that momentum still carries on from the original film, in a surprising fashion. There's a reason why, we did the variant cover from the movie poster art, and it was one of the biggest sellers of that first run. And that's one of the ones that I signed more than any other. Like, it still carries that kind of cachet with people.
I mean, the biggest challenge really is just like casting Conan. I thought Momoa was great, but and Arnold's fantastic, but like, who would you do now?
I thought Momoa looked the part. I thought he visually was a good fit. He was at a weird position in his career, and it could have, if it had been the right film under the different auspice, I think it could have completely changed the trajectory of the franchise and him, because I saw those posters and I was really surprised. I was like, oh, the guy's got the visual pretty down cold. Let's see how it goes. And then you're like, oh, it's Conan in name only. It's a series of kind of generic fantasy set pieces with a bit of like kind of nasty edge. And there's little moments that almost kind of get you there. And then there's a whole lot of other stuff. And it's like, man, instead of going with these weird choices in terms of the conflicts and the set pieces and all that stuff, why wouldn't you go back to the source material? And it's all right there. It's the possibilities are endless.
Well, you've done an absolutely fantastic job crafting this character for a fresh and modern audience. I am curious, though, how did you get your start writing Conan?
I mean, I was very lucky in the sense that Gail Simone was actually writing the Red Sonja series at Dynamite, and a deal was put together to do the first crossover between the two characters in about, I think, 15 or 16 years. So both Dark Horse and Dynamite were going to be co-publishing this crossover miniseries. And they asked Gail to write it. And she had the idea, since it's going to be a crossover miniseries, why not have crossover writers, like have two writers do it? And she knew I loved the character, and she'd liked some of my other fantasy writing, and asked me if I wanted to co-write with her. And that was a game changer for me in ways I never could have imagined. I thought it was just going to be that one project and I get to collaborate with her and build a story. And early on, we were trying to figure out what era to build on. There's complexities, but if you want to break it and simplify it, there's three kind of core eras of the character, right? You've got Conan in his youth, kind of impetuous, testing his limits, wanderlust, heading in and around the world, the Hyborian age. You've got him slowly taking on more responsibilities, taking on a darkness out in the tragedy after Queen of the Black Coast, and then slowly becoming a leader of men and realizing that he can't just eschew civilization. It's going to be part of him and it's going to define the things he does, whether he likes it or not, whether he fights against it or whether he leads it. And then, King Conan, he becomes a king by his own hand. And the kind of ennui that comes forth from not becoming realizing that he is a leader and that he is the king. And now he has to deal with matters of state while he's still got this burning kind of fire of the barbarian beneath the surface. And they're three very different character modes, and they tell a really cool kind of story of a person. And we didn't know which one we wanted to play with. And Gail quite brilliantly had the idea of, let's do a story that starts in their youth and something they do moves through so that they meet up three different times. And each time they have to deal with this problem that begins in their youth. And so we get to show all three eras of the characters. And it was a lot of fun and it was a cool challenge. And I just felt so almost overwhelmed with the feeling of, oh man, this character's a legend and let's make this as cool as possible. And there were moments I definitely feel like we hit it and we did a good job and we told an entertaining yarn. But I hadn't fully appreciated the kind of the footprint of that character. And maybe that was a good thing because I could have psyched myself out. When Conan returned to Marvel, I had been writing on several Avengers titles, and they decided one of the ways they wanted to reintroduce the character at Marvel was to do it as part of a superhero crossover. And they asked me if I'd be interested, and I honestly was really nervous about it because I knew the hardcore fandom would not want the character crisscrossing with Earth's Mightiest Heroes or the Marvel Universe as a whole. And essentially, they said, well, if you don't do it, someone else is going to. I was like, well, someone else will screw it up. So I better do it and try and do it to the best of my ability. And that was kind of the goal, was to tell the best damn kind of Conan story within the confines of this crazy crossover. And we had some really cool, fun moments. My buddy Sean Isaac drew that, especially the Conan section in the middle, and really knocked it out of the park. And I felt pretty cool about that. And so it was like with each attempt, I'm trying to sort of improve my understanding of the character. And maybe it was I don't want to say maybe, it's probably an ego thing. I talked to Mark Basso. He was the editor who was handling the Conan books at Marvel. And I said, both chances I'd had to be, for lack of a better term, a bard for the Barbarian have been co-writing gigs. And even if I was writing the majority of the Conan stuff myself, the audience doesn't know that. They see multiple names on the cover. So I got to get this out of my head. I need a solo Conan story. I really want to tell what I think makes an intrinsically cool pulp in the style of Robert E. Howard. I want to tell that kind of a story. And so I pitched Mark this story called The Gambler that they did as a 3-part story in Savage Sword of Conan, which wasn't the classic black and white format at Marvel on the second go. It was just a full color kind of anthology book. And hilariously, Pat Zerker drew that story, who's now doing, Solomon Kane for us at in the new Savage Sword. So Pat drew that story, and I just tried to put it all out there. I wanted to do this story that felt like a Conan story and use some of those ingredients, but you hadn't quite seen them combined this way before. And that was supposed to be my mic drop. That was supposed to be my okay, this is what I think a cool Conan story is. I got it out of my head and out. Hyborian, out. I'm done. I did it. I'm happy. I'm proud. I told my own little cool pulp, fantasy story in the style of. And I felt like I did it. It worked. And that would be it. And instead of it becoming my last Conan story, or really my first solo one, but my only chance to kind of embody that's the one that really got on the radar for Heroic Signatures. That's the rights holders, particularly Fred Malmberg he read The Gambler, and to him, it was an audition. It was, this guy really knows the stuff. He's got the voice. He's got that sense of stakes and intensity, and putting Conan through his paces, like really messing him up in the way that a good character can overcome, seemingly impossible odds. And so what I thought would be my last chance to write Conan became the start of an entirely different phase of my career in and around the character. They reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in pitching more stories. They wanted to see if I could work with some of the other characters in the Robert E. Howard canon who I knew, Solomon Kane and Dark Agnes and stuff like that. And it really struck up the conversation that has now led to, the current Heroic Signatures series, being done in English through Titan. And with each attempt, I feel like I get closer. I understand more. I marinate more, particularly when the Marvel run wrapped up. I did the monthly book for, just over a year, and I learned a lot, and it was a really cool experience, and everyone was very supportive. But this was also 2020, and the world was kind of spinning off its axis. And so we were all pretty distracted, and I thought, that's it. Again, I wrapped up my time, and I was like, well, did the best I could in the Hyborian age, and we made a little block of books, and this was fun. Cool, I will look back on that fondly. And, Fred reached out to me again and essentially said, do you want to pitch on our new publishing initiative? And I told my wife, I said, it'll never happen. And she's like, well, then pitch fearlessly. And that's what I did. I kind of went in with like all guns a-blazing, like, well, this will never happen. So here's the dream. Here's the big plan. Here's the cool mythos. Here's how deep and interconnected and funky we can go if you guys are down. And, you got my number, call me. And lo and behold, I got the call, and Fred's like, you're the man. We want to do this. Let's put together the creative team. I was gobsmacked. I was genuinely kind of blown away. And he said, who are you interested in drawing it? And I said, Rob de la Torre is my number one choice. I had seen his artwork. I had been blown away by how it really purely channeled that visceral pulp energy from the classic comics. And it has strains of Big John Buscema and, Frazetta and a little bit of Hal Foster and all these bits, but they still are his own thing as well. The way he lays on the page, the way he builds that, dynamic core. And I really just wanted to work with him and see what we could do. And Fred agreed, and we courted Rob and got him on board. And that was sort of the linchpin of the thing. And then getting Richard Starkings and Jose Villarrubia and Dean White and just everyone, it felt like alchemical. Like when we started to put those pages together for the Free Comic Book Day issue, I wrote them in a different style. So Rob and I had a really cool, back and forth. And he was saying that he wanted to have more freedom to kind of lay out the page instead of a lot of modern comics are being written, page 1, panel 2, panel 3, I don't think it's intended as marching orders, but essentially really defining the format from the writer's kind of space. And a lot of the classic comics, like your Stan Lee or your Roy Thomas, they were done in an outline style. These things are going to happen on the page. You figure out how many panels are going to tell that story best. And then we go in and we dialogue it. And that's how Rob and I are working. And so he is that kind of complete unit storyteller where he can do that. Not a lot of artists can in the modern era. They don't think that way, but he does. And so he lays out these stunning, insane pages with so much energy and excitement. And then once I've got that in front of me, man, it's like, you have to live up to it. Like you can't just, not that I was going to do a crappy job anyways, but you can't just half-ass the verbiage, the captions. You have to make narration that takes it even further, that elevates it even more, that drives it home how potent and powerful this can be. And as soon as I did that the first time with that artwork in front of me, I was like, oh, this feels different. This feels like electrical in a way I haven't felt writing comics in quite some time. And I think people feel that energy on the page and they see it, in their hands. And it's really, really special, honestly. And whenever I need to kind of recharge that battery, I kind of look at that artwork or I reread some of those old stories and I'm just like, what did it feel like when I was a kid and I saw this for the first time? Like, how much of that can I kind of pull forth and hold on to and then just like unleash on the page? And it was, you mentioned about news stories. That was super valuable to me. That as much as I love the original stories in the comics and particularly in the short stories, we can't just adapt them again. I don't want to be a cover band. I don't just want to play the same stock tunes over and over again, because no matter how cool we could make them visually, it's incredibly hard to surprise you. It's impossible to surprise you with those plot beats. They've been done. They're iconic. And so for me, it was like, okay, we could channel some moments from those stories or we can build on the canon that they establish, but we also have to be able to surprise. That a big portion of that entertainment comes from building cliffhangers where you literally don't know what's coming next. That from month to month, we can pull out cool curveballs and shocks and surprises and fun little Easter eggs and get a readership that hopefully feels a little bit of that energy like they had when they were younger and they were collecting. And cracking open a new issue is about discovery, not just a nostalgia thing.
You're killing it, man. You're absolutely crushing it. I can tell that you understand the psyche of the character. So I'm curious, how do you define Conan, his character traits, his attributes? How do you get into the head of this guy?
You can distill it down a lot of different ways, but at its absolute core for me, Conan is like the ultimate survivor, right? And he survivor in a physical sense and survivor in a mental sense, like the will to carry on, the will to continue, the will to overcome, whether that's magic or physical threats or mental domination or leadership or whatever that might be. He is a survivor in that very, very core sense. And he's also, he is a pure adventurer in that he wants to see and he wants to discover and he wants to challenge himself, and that he will survive whatever the world throws at him. And that is something we all aspire to be, something that sort of intrinsically strikes as being cool and confident and, macho and the kind of good, whatever, masculine energy, if you want to put it in that kind of way, that it is taking charge or picking up the mantle or taking responsibility or striking, when something needs to be struck. And that's what I find really fascinating about that character, is that sense that he is aspirational in those good qualities. If we channel that element of honor and that idea of taking responsibility and surviving and carrying on and moving forward, then he can be a really potent force for change, or he can be a really interesting weapon up against archaic systems. So much of the Robert E. Howard stories were built around these ideas of savagery and civility, and that civilization is not a civilized place, right? That the people that claim to be the most civilized and the most, they have their laws and their rules and their cities and their kingdoms, they would stab you in the back in a moment, and that their morals are compromised. And the barbarian will always tell you and kill you to your face and tell you when you're going to cross him too far, and honor his promises and fight with you, side by side until his dying breath. And that is what is really cool about it. Even when he's a thief, even when he's like stealing and destroying, he does it in a fashion that is purity of purpose, and he'll tear down the edifices and the governmental or religious complexes that stifle, the freedom of a man or of a civilization. And I find that really powerful, especially when he becomes the king. And now you have this like bubbling intensity of conflict that is his entire purpose. Is now he's the bull in the china shop, man. Like he is in some ways the perfect king, because he can be decisive and be powerful and be potent, but he's also been put in this gilded kind of cage. And you're like, man, that is a powerful bit of contrast. That is a really cool intrinsic kind of a thing. And it's somewhere on this just razor's edge of aspirational and tragic, this character in his past his prime. And there's just so much cool there to explore. And the conflicts are inherent in the different eras. The iconic nature of his personality means that we kind of know who he is, so we're excited to put him into new circumstances and up against new challenges and see how he responds. In that way, he's what some people call a procedural character. He doesn't necessarily change very much within a story. He doesn't go through your classic 3-act kind of arc that you'd see in a lot of Hollywood movies. He is a standard bearer and he stays the same, but the world breaks around him. He's more like Columbo. We want Columbo to go solve a mystery in a place and be the most Columbo he can be. And we're fascinated to see how he deals with this mystery, this crime, this criminal, this place. And Conan's very much the same way. We want him to be as Conan as possible and put him into a circumstance that we've never quite seen before, or up against a threat where we're fascinated to see where the Cimmerian's, strength will take him. And that's strength as a physical element and strength of purpose and strength of will.
Now, in addition to Conan, you also get this incredible sandbox of the Hyborian age, which you are handling like everything else, phenomenally. What is your approach to painting this tapestry of the Hyborian age?
Like the character himself, it's pretty iconic. All these cultures and elements are exaggerated and extrapolated from history and just sort of like taffy pulled in different directions and slammed into each other to make cool possibilities. The long, livid kind of history that Robert E. Howard posits, characters evolving and cultures devolving, being corrupted or being pulled up out of the muck, the mysterious sort of magics and the movements of gods that have their own plans in very much like almost that elder god or eldritch kind of mode, I think is really cool and really powerful and so much more interesting to me than your classic kind of high fantasy where you just get the destined item and you're the destined hero and, fill in the blank, you're going to win. I like that Conan is almost inserting himself into the machinations and destroying the plans of kingdoms and demons and gods, whether or not he even knows that's what's happening, that he's the fly in the ointment or he's the sword that splits the stone kind of thing. Like he is so cool in that way and so powerful a force. And when he enters into the equation, no one quite knows which way it's going to go, but we as readers know it's going to be so damn entertaining. That's what's so cool about it. And so it's my job to find places to put him where you either lean into the icon and you go, oh, he's so good when he's in the jungles or in the deserts or when he's trucking through the frozen north, or, oh man, I've never seen him quite deal with this, or he's under the gun or on his back feet in this kind of a situation. And that's really the goal for me, is trying to find those that the place exemplifies the story, that it sort of becomes an echo of the messages we're trying to say about a character who overcomes all. And that he's not invulnerable. He's not bulletproof. He is very, very, very strong and he has incredible constitution, but he needs to be, you have to be able to wound him. You have to be able to bring him low. You have to be able to take him down. And then he climbs out of the pit. And then he recovers from the grievous injury. And then he comes back to exact that revenge. That he is mortal, even though we see him do seemingly, the impossible. And I think that that's a really cool aspect of it. The mortality of it, the punishment you could sort of inflict upon this guy. That the world itself is, savage and relentless. And that the average person in the Hyborian age is sort of holding on by their fingernails and hoping that they can live whatever you might determine is a good life, whether that's a faithful one or a quiet one, or have a family and carry out your existence as a traveler or a farmer or a merchant or what may have you. But there are few that can break the world on their knee like Conan can, that they can go into strange places, or they can put themselves in front of the direst of threats, whether those are mortal threats or immortal, frightening, terrifying forces, and not back down, you know? And that's what's cool about it, is the Hyborian Age can represent all those kinds of things. It's all there to be discovered. And around any corner, there's a new mystery, there's a new patch of shadow that we can sort of delve into.
All right, now we're not going to get into spoilers, but let's talk about Thulsa Doom, because fans who have been paying attention will know that his presence is lingering in the background of the Conan series. Maybe he makes an appearance. But real fans will also know that Thulsa Doom is primarily a Kull villain. Of course, James Earl Jones portrayed him in the movie, but he is a Kull villain. What led to your decision to bring this character into the Conan series?
Thulsa Doom is, the name is iconic now thanks to the movie, but he is a Kull villain, and he only shows up in one Kull story. What's crazy, I almost think the name carries more cachet than almost anything else. It just sounds cool. It sounds potent. It's badass. But the character, this ancient, Atlantean necromancer, and his machinations, whatever they may be, echoing across time and beyond death, I think is so potent and cool. Thulsa might be the iconic kind of Conan villain, and I say reoccurring in a very loose sense. He only shows up in a couple stories, and in a very removed kind of way. They don't have necessarily face-to-face conflict or confrontation. And so it was important to me that, first of all, we use someone and something iconic and powerful. We show the bigger, broader potential of, this isn't an official term, the Howardverse as an idea, that these stories, that the Thurian Age leads to the Hyborian Age, and that there are echoes of it throughout a lot of different Robert E. Howard stories, that it's not just even Kull and Conan, that the ring of Thothamon shows up in a Kerwin and Conrad story in the pulps, and that, these characters and gods and demons and monsters, their visage appears in, Bren McMorn and all these other places as well. And I wanted to be able to tease that potential out in our first year in a way that sort of says, everything's on the table. We're going to take this pulp kind of masterpiece that's been crafted and show you as many cool adventures as humanly possible, and make the stakes huge, but not lose the humanity and the intensity of it. That was really intrinsic. And the benefit of using Thulsa Doom is that because he speaks to Kull, we've instantly got that connectivity to, it's not just the Hyborian Age, but it's bigger and broader than you know. You do have the brand name recognition from the movie. So if someone has seen the movie and likes that character, we are hewing very close to the original Howard canon, but that name still carries power, and it still says, oh yeah, that's a Conan villain. You're like, in theory, no, but in theory, yes. And so we kind of get the benefits of both, being able to use it in that way. And because the character's power can cross time and death, it raises the stakes in that broad sense, that Thulsa Doom's power has echoed forth from the Thurian Age into the Hyborian Age, and his plans will not lay dormant any longer. And that intensity and that power, it just gives the reader that sense that we're on the cusp of something massive, even if Conan is always dealing with the immediate threat in front of him.
Let's talk the Howardverse. Let's talk about the Howardverse, because Robert E. Howard is the grandfather of shared universes, and there's a lot of cool characters outside of Conan that he created. Solomon Kane, Dark Agnes, El Barak, one of my personal favorites, Conrad and Kirwan. What is your approach to painting this wide tapestry of the Howardverse?
In the first story arc, Bound in Blackstone, we introduced a character named Brissa. So it's a new character, but with a very specific intent that she could become connective tissue to something like the Thurian Age, that we could broaden the idea of the Picts as this sort of bloodline that has been corrupted, and the Picts that, Conan fights in some of his, later stories and things like that are not just the only version of the Picts in the Hyborian Age, that there was, for lack of a better term, the royal bloodline that would have come from Brule the Spear Slayer, that the at some point, just like Howard showed in so many of his stories about the apocalypse of ages and then a rising up of a new people and then another cataclysmic event, carrying the Thurian Age forth to eventually become the Hyborian Age, which in some ways is almost like a post-apocalyptic version of the Thurian Age, that we could show the rise and fall of the Picts in the stories and use Brissa as the fulcrum of that kind of pendulum to show that she represents this continuous lineage and this timeline in a really cool way. And so then we've got that really clear tether between her and that ancient Pict sword to the Thurian Age in a way that connects up with our third story arc, The Age Unconquered, and makes that connection rock solid and intense and potent and powerful. And once we do that, that became kind of the skeleton to build out that broader, multiverse, that Howardverse in that way. And I agree with you 100%, that sense that the interconnectivity of it is natural and part of the original story. That in Children of the Night, Bran MacMorn calls forth Cull the King to help him, battle. And that this stuff has always been there. And whether Howard intended it as expediency, writing his pulp stories, or he had a big, broad tapestry kind of laid out, it does feel fitting to kind of tap into that energy and sort of say, look at these cool threads, look at these fun things, let's weave them together even more tightly, even more intently. That the Black Stone as this kind of MacGuffin magic material shows up in multiple Howard stories, whether they're the pulp stories of Kirwan and Conrad, or, showing up in some of his, like the story literally called The Black Stone, or descriptions of items and places in Cull. That it was already there, just sort of waiting to be kind of lifted up and brought together. And that's very much what I feel like we're trying to do. Not pave over any of the things that's there, but sort of pull them out into the light and go, check this cool thing out. Look at how that sockets in here. Look at how much excitement and adventure we can sort of take from all this pulp milieu and deliver it to the public in a way that they haven't quite seen before. That a character like Elborak or Solomon Kane or Dark Agnes, that they may never reach the same kind of pop culture acknowledgement as Conan the Barbarian, but they're just as worthy in terms of characters with cool storytelling possibilities. And if we bring them together on an epic kind of quest, we kind of raise all ships up and give people, more bang for their buck.
Yeah, dude, I'm really excited to see Conrad and Kirwan, especially because there's just not a lot of adaptations of them out there. I think maybe they had a comic.
Now, Kirwan and Conrad's like, they've been really short-served in the stories. There are a bunch of neat ideas there, but they're so short and there's very little characterization. And there's almost no description of them visually. So this is really our chance to kind of set a mold for characters that the general public has no knowledge of whatsoever. And we can sort of go, check these guys out. These are our occult investigators. And they become the anchor point for, it sounds weird to say contemporary stories. For us, in all the documentation, contemporary is always the 1930s. It's not about bringing things into the 2020s. It's about the era they were written in. That's our contemporary mold, and still has a great deal of kind of mystery. The world has not been completely charted yet. You don't have high technology at your disposal. There's still a lot of cool darkness in the corners that we can explore.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's basically like a 1930s X-Files team. It's going to be great.
Yeah, that's what's so great about them.
Let's talk Belit, because she plays a big role in this ongoing series, and it takes place after the events of Queen of the Black Coast. What led to the decision to weave her into the narrative?
For most fans, like top three, classic Conan stories, Queen of the Black Coast is right up there. And it's definitely one of my favorites as well. The intensity and the tragedy of it is so visceral and so powerful. And again, I didn't just want to readapt it. I don't feel like you can just tell the same story over and over again. And yet, I'd never really felt like we've seen the full kind of depths of the echoing after effects of that story. Who is Conan after, Belit dies? And what permanent mark has it sort of made on him as a man and his greater goals and purpose? And so right there, I felt like we had such a meaty emotional core that we could delve into, and using flashbacks, first some scenes that were in the original Queen of the Black Coast story, but also to show moments that have never been seen before, interactions between the characters, and the way that she is such a potent and charismatic character in all the bright and dark ways, that her passion and her intensity, I wanted to show how this woman could be the Queen of the Black Coast, how she could be a pirate queen and have a crew that would just follow her to death. Like, who do you have to be, and how intense a personality do you have to be to do that, to win Conan's heart and the entire crew of the Tigress, right? So you have to have someone who sets these goals with, the burning, smoldering intensity of their vision and then carries it out. But that carries a great danger as well, that they are so sure of themselves and their obsessive quality that it can swallow you whole, and that I wanted to show how dangerous she was in that sense, the way she sets her mind to things, the way she obsesses over things, the way she desires things and she lusts after power and love and intensity. And if she's not getting that intensity, then she will conjure it from the ether. She'll add danger to her own life. She'll threaten, Conan just to see what it does, to test the limits of his love for her and the bond that they share. And I got some really great messages from, scholars of the stories and fans of the series who were shocked at some of those moments that we put into that second story arc, because it definitely hews to the original text a little more than I think some of the comic stories, where she could be a little bit, not passive. She was always intense, but our series has a mature rating for a reason, and we can really push the envelope. And I feel like we did that in a way that hopefully respects the original pulps, but also kind of feeds on some of that energy. And that's nothing against any of the older stories, but it was just like, man, I see this really cool facet that we can explore, and I want to just drive it home as intensely as possible. And thankfully, when you've got an artist like Doug Braithwaite drawing it, anything is possible. Comics are a visual medium, and when you've got the right artist on the right project and they know what you're going for, then they can just level it up on every single panel, every single page. And I feel like Doug really did that. Once he got his hooks into it and he understood what we were going for, some of those moments he draws in the second arc are genuinely chilling. There's a flashback scene of, Belit hanging from the yardarm, and we've always seen it from these oblique angles, her face turned away or her body in silhouette and in shadow. And I said, I want her looking at us. And Doug drew this panel that it's haunting. There's no other word you can say for it. Diego's colors take it to a whole other level. And I saw that page and I was almost like, oh my God, we've gone too far. I'm freaked out by it. I wrote the damn thing and I'm freaked out by it. And that's the sign of just like everyone in sync, like trying to just blow the doors off, in terms of that emotional intensity and mining as much of it as we could and putting it on the page. And it ripples powerfully outward. And I'm really proud of it. There's dialogue in there where I felt like I was really getting in her head, and the way that she sort of sees Conan in her own life. She talks about the fact that, they have this pact, this prayer to live a life that is, full-throated and fearless. And when they die, even gods shall gasp at the loss. And I was like, yep, that's the line. And sometimes it comes out of you in the on the script, and you're just like, whew, that's a keeper. I'm gonna go circle the block and come back and keep going, because I don't know where that came from, but I need more of that guy on the page,
Well, hey man, that's actually an esoteric phenomena that occurs. A lot of authors, a lot of famous authors, hear the characters speaking to them in their head, telling them stories, or like, hey, you're getting this wrong, write this down. And whether it's real or just woo-woo, it's really cool that that's happening to you.
You marinate yourself in the material. You're thinking about it. It's rolling around in your subconscious. And sometimes you solve problems subconsciously that you don't even know. There's a weird moment. Sometimes I'm lying in bed and I know I'm waking up, but I'm not, like, the alarm doesn't need to go off today. And you're just kind of drifting into a conscious state. And the narrative problems you've been trying to tackle for weeks are just bubbling in the background. And all of a sudden it's like a synapse fires and you hear something kind of cool and you're like, keep going, you're almost there. And I'm not trying to sound corny or dramatic. I have a little notepad by my bed on the little bedside table, just in case. And then you get a cool little bit of poetry or a bit of lyricism, or an kind of two ideas sort of intersect in your brain. And you're like, don't lose that. Hold on to it. Scribble it down. Sometimes it's garbage. Sometimes it's absolute friggin' gold. And those are the kind of moments you wake up and you're like, well, I think we're having a good writing day,
Well, hey, speaking of the mysteries of reality and the subconscious mind, I really love the way that you're handling Conan dealing with the trauma of losing Belit. She appears several times and it's kind of left to be ambiguous as to whether it's actually Belit, communicating to Conan from the beyond, or if it's just in his head. And I think that's true to the source material and really interesting way to explore that trauma.
That once the decision was made that we were going to take a tragedy and build another one into it, that even the thieves that Conan sort of finds not even soulless, but just like where he ends up hanging his hat in Shadazar and takes on this mercenary role as this hired muscle. And we were going to show this tragic, explosive, not even catharsis, like destructive, self-destructive quality. He's going to drink himself to excess and he's going to go out and kill to get more gold and then spend that. And just like that absolute, PTSD is a good word for it, like self-destructive cycle of regret and depression and self-destruction. But he's still the survivor. He won't let himself die. He won't commit suicide. He's still at his heart, still the Cimmerian, still doing, carrying on despite the emotional kind of black hole that's eating him up inside, and showing that kind of raising the stakes and the bad decisions he's made around selling the picked sword and aligning himself with just this self-destructive cycle for short-term gain. And then all the echoing kind of elements of the past coming to haunt him, both the power of the Black Stone and those specters, and, Thulsa Doom getting his revenge from beyond the grave, taking hold of Conan and turning it almost into, like, I joked around when we were putting the outline together, I said, we're basically turning him into like Jason Voorhees in that issue. Like, he is this unstoppable, horrific force haunting and hunting for that sword, that he needs that artifact back, and everything is going to break around him in a way that's no longer the Cimmerian, but just this monstrous tool of evil, that he will shatter, people, and he will destroy lives in that hunt to take what must be taken for Thulsa Doom. But that what could not be conquered was that intrinsic core of him, and the intensity and the promise that he made to Belit, and that would be his way back. That would be his way to fight, for freedom, whatever manner it took. And that's what I thought was a really cool thing about that, she is such a powerful and potent force. And in the original Queen of the Black Coast story, her ghost arrives at a key moment to sort of bring him back from the brink and distract this creature so he can fight back and win. And she's still there, whether or not we don't ever kind of answer the question whether it is her literally telling him and saving him again in his mind, or just that the rippling kind of echo of her memory is enough for him to call upon his own will and do what must be done. Either way, it's we say something sort of about their love and about the pact, between them.
Well, hey, man. I mean, again, you've done a great job.
Thanks, man.
I've sung you praises this entire episode. People are going to be like, hey, man, what a suck up. But, dude, it is well deserved.
Yeah, I went into this new relaunch. It felt impossible that I got the chance to do this. And so I knew if I didn't put my all into it, not that I ever try and do a crappy job, but like, it just felt so special. And I marinated myself in the original stories. I went back and reread my favorites from Savage Sword of Conan and the monthly book, and just like try to tap into this inner well of like, why do you love Conan? Why does everyone else love Conan? How much of that passion and energy and excitement can we put on the page to prove to people that this is another amazing time to be reading his adventures? And that if I didn't give it anything less than 100%, I would kick myself forever, given the depth and the possibility in this, new publishing initiative. And when that first, Free Comic Day hit, and there was a pretty good thunderclap and a ripple to people in their excitement, like, oh, this feels really old school, but I've never read this story before. And then first couple issues of Bad and Blackstone come out and they're instantly selling out. And I'm getting messages from readers and retailers and reviewers like I have never had in my career before. The issues are selling out in, record quick. We're going back to print. We're going back to print again. And I'm like, okay, like that is a vindication for the hard work and the intensity of the process. And now we've got the wind in our backs. Let's not screw this up,
So the comic series is incredible. We also have the new incarnation of Savage Sword, which you are lending your talents to as well. Let's talk about your memories of the original Savage Sword and what is your approach to this new incarnation?
So Savage Sword of Conan was the standard bearer for black and white kind of comic adventure magazine, when it first started being published in the 70s into the 80s. You had the Comics Code Authority on almost every comic being published, full color in that regular comic format. And so there's a limit to what you can show on the page, especially when it comes to violence and obviously nudity as well. And we'd already decided we were going to make a mature readers, version of the monthly book for the Titan series, but we felt like there was still something so visceral and intense about Savage Sword as a format, that the black and white on newsprint kind of format, it speaks to an all-time classic era of the character. And it forces the artists working on it to kind of level up their game in terms of storytelling and in terms of clarity and in terms of intensity. And so we wanted to put that back together. So the editorial team at Heroic, we discussed, can we do this? Is this something that we can do? And if we're going to do it, how can we get some of the best creative teams of the past to kind of come and celebrate with us, along with new artists that we feel speak to a new generation of this kind of pulp storytelling? And so I'm so proud to be in the mix on that. I'm one of the writers who's going to be putting material in multiple issues. The first issue, I have a prose short story, which is pretty audacious, if I'm being honest, like trying to write a short story in the style of, the original pulps. And it's based on the phenomenal cover art of Joe Jusko, who's an absolute icon in this industry and has illustrated some of the most memorable images of Conan. To get him back to do a brand new Conan illustration on the cover of number 1 for the first time in, I think, over 25 years, he did a Conan painting. And it's so good. It's an instant classic, that piece. And then to take that as the inspiration for a new cool short story that we put together. It's called Sacrifice in the Sand. And I just wanted to write this ultimate kind of badass action scene with Conan unleashing his barbaric fury on a series of Stygian soldiers in the desert in the middle of a sandstorm, and make it feel as intense and cool as possible, and describe that explosion of violence in the way that Robert E. Howard does in stories that just, my imagination went wild when I read those original tales, you know? And I don't think I can obviously live up to the man and his inventiveness, but even to just try and get a little bit of that parallel kind of energy and put that on the page, and not have the fallback position of someone like a Rob de la Torre or Doug Braithwaite illustrating every panel. It tests you in a really, really cool way. It forces you to dig deeper, which I was really proud of. Then I'm doing some comic stories that are going to be showing up in upcoming issues, but also getting to kind of pass the baton around to other creators with John Arcudi or Frank Thierry, or just other people, you know, Pat Zerker doing the new Solomon Kane story, getting to play in this amazing sandbox of kind of pulp storytelling and creativity. And we all get to psych each other up and try and make the coolest stories we can. And the readers benefit. You know, that's what's so fun about it and so cool about it. And you're getting self-contained stories, you're getting ongoing serialized stories, you're getting a prose bit here, you're getting an essay to give you a greater appreciation for the history and the legacy of this stuff. It's like a complete package, and it's going to take you, it's meaty. It's going to take you a long time to read through an issue. This is not a quick little browse. It's like, settle in, get your favorite drink of choice. Just the whole world's going to melt away, and you're going to be in a classic era of comic storytelling, you know? And I think I said this before, but like, when those copies came in and we got the package and I cracked it open and I pulled it out, I had this like incongruency in my head, because it was simultaneously a time capsule of a very formative part of my youth, but my name was on the cover, and that makes no sense. That's impossible. How could 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old me be in Savage Sword of Conan #1? You know, how could I be writing it now? And it's like this amazing kind of full circle moment of fandom for me. And yeah, it's really, really special. The response to the first issue coming out, the social media kind of explosion, retailers, we were really worried, honestly, that whether retailers would stock it well, because it's not a format that you see anymore in modern comic retail. And it's not something that, you know, most stores, they just, that's not the format that they've been trained to kind of put out there in the world. But I think the counter programming of it and the history of it kind of broke through those barriers and reminded people about a very special time in comics and why we all get into this stuff in the first place. And so if we can maintain that kind of momentum across these 6 issues over the next year, I'm really hoping we can make it ongoing. I'm really hoping we can just have those 2, you know, comics, Conan the Barbarian, Savage Sword of Conan. You got your fix all over again, and you know, month to month, it's going to be a damn good time.
Well, you, my friend, are clearly riding on a career high right now. You got a lot of talent. You also have a YouTube series called Comics School, which I think is great. Anyone out there that's interested in breaking into comics, you should check that out on Jim Zub's YouTube channel. But yeah, just to wrap things up, if you could give advice to any aspiring creatives out there, what would it be?
I mean, the simplest bit of advice is also the hardest, right? In order to make comics professionally, this is true of any art form, honestly, or any kind of skill. No one will pay you to do a thing until you do it at a level worth paying for, right? So you have to prove you can make comics for people to pay you to make comics for them, right? So make the kinds of stories that you as a reader are hungry to read. Make artwork that you would be inspired to see out there on the stands, and keep pushing yourself. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick, but all of these skills take time to build. You know, my career has had this crazy winding path through all sorts of different opportunities. And at every juncture, the more I learned about the medium as a whole of comics, I learned about editorial and marketing and coloring and lettering and art and writing. And the more I understood other people's jobs, the better I got at the job that I wanted to have, which was being a writer and doing a good by everyone else on the team. And so don't think that you just have to step into this and go, well, I'm going to write a story. Someone else is going to do the hard work of drawing it, and done. I'll be a professional and all the doors will open and everything's going to happen. Be curious, be flexible, be, treat it like a job, and be critical of your own work in that sense that you finish things, you learn from them, and then you start again and you build the next kind of project. Especially at the start of your career, short stories are going to be really valuable to you, especially if you're collaborating with other people. It's almost like, dating before the serious relationship. You get to try stuff out. You get to collaborate with other people. Does this relationship work? Does this working relationship function? Are we, at every juncture, we finish something, a 2-page story, a 3-page story, a 6-page story, or 10 pages. Now we have a sense of style. We have a sense of narration. We have a sense of completion. And you can look at this thing as a complete unit and go, what have I learned? How stories are told, how the comic book medium functions, how we communicate as a team, and what did we finish? And then take that knowledge and then make another thing. And if it's with the people that you did it with last time because you get along great, those are the working relationships that will grow with you. So many of the people I get to work with now are the people who kind of came up in the industry at the same time as me. And maybe they were 1 or 2 rungs above or 1 or 2 rungs below, but eventually we all sort of climbed up that ladder and found, different places to go. And sometimes you're helping someone. I can't help someone at the very, very bottom, and I can't help get to someone way crazy high up. But within my sort of span, we can all kind of push and pull and climb together and find new challenges and make cool stuff. And so I'm in this amazing place right now where I get to build on, the foundation of one of my absolute favorite characters in fiction. I get to work with people who are just as passionate about it as I am. I get to work with the rights holders of the thing. So all I have to do is convince a handful of people with enthusiasm that we've got a cool direction and we're all, sprinting in the same direction. And that is, it's a really special thing, but it doesn't have to be the legitimacy of a publisher that makes you a creator. Make your own stories. There are more outlets now than ever before. Put that stuff online, use crowdfunding or just self-publish it. Take it to a convention, show other people, get an artist alley table, put your work out there in the universe. And I think you might be surprised how enjoyable that is as a process, whether or not it's always a hobby or whether it becomes a career, and find your sort of niche within the broader industry.
All right, the most important question of all, the last question. What are you doing this weekend?
Man, I'm writing more Conan. I'm writing more Conan than I've ever written. It's crazy, but it's true. I've got, comic book production is not just about the next story. It's stories that are in the art phase, line art, colors, lettering, proofing, bouncing ideas back and forth with Jeff Shanks in terms of research or the essays. It's brainstorming and planning the stuff for the future. It's like we're holding all these different pieces at the same time, and they're moving down this pipeline until they get into stores. And so on a monthly book like Conan the Barbarian or every other month on Savage Sword, there is so much cool material coming in the door. And I'm just constantly in awe that we're able to, keep it rolling and keep it rolling with such kind of intensity. And the least I can do is do my part and come up with really fun set pieces and ideas to hand off to the next person in the chain. And so this weekend, I've got some amazing writing that I want to get done. Stories that I outlined probably 5, 6, 7 months ago. Now I finally get to viscerally dig in and script them out and see artwork coming in for the other issues that are going to be out this fall, and know that you guys are in for one hell of a ride.
Jim, thank you so much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure. I hope we can have you back on soon, my friend.
My absolute pleasure.
Oh my God, you guys, that was crazy. It was the Zubster. What did you think? What did you think? That was great, right? In these segments, at the end of the podcast, I'm kind of like Steve from Blue's Clues, but for Conan. It's actually a fun idea. We should do something with that, but I'm out of steam for today, so maybe later. What do you think of the new Savage Sword comic series? What characters would you like to see outside of Conan tackled next, and who do you want to see on the show? Let us know in the comments. Please like and subscribe. I am Sean Curley. Crawl back for more next time.